Ted Bundy, one of America's most notorious serial killers, led a complex and troubled life from a young age. His childhood and adolescence laid the foundation for the monstrous persona he would later reveal to the world. This video delves into the early life of Theodore Robert Bundy, exploring his upbringing, family dynamics, and the psychological factors that may have contributed to his criminal behavior. Theodore Robert Cowell was born on November 24, 1946, in Burlington, Vermont, to Eleanor Louise Cowell. His birth certificate lists Lloyd Marshall as his father, although this has never been confirmed, and Bundy himself gave conflicting stories about his paternity. For the first few years of his life, Bundy lived with his mother and maternal grandparents, Samuel and Eleanor Cowell, in Philadelphia. To avoid the social stigma associated with being born out of wedlock, Bundy was told that his grandparents were his parents and that his mother was his older sister. Bundy's grandfather, Samuel Cowell, was known to have a volatile temper and was described as a tyrannical figure. He was reportedly abusive towards his wife and the family pets, and his aggressive behavior may have had a lasting impact on Bundy. Despite this, Bundy later spoke affectionately of his grandfather, suggesting a complex and possibly conflicted relationship. In 1950, Eleanor Cowell took her son and moved to Tacoma, Washington, where she legally changed her surname to Nelson. She married Johnny Culpepper Bundy, a hospital cook, in 1951. Johnny Bundy adopted Ted, giving him his last name, and the couple went on to have 4 more children together. Despite Johnny Bundy's efforts to include Ted in family activities, Ted remained emotionally distant from his stepfather. Ted Bundy's relationship with his mother was also complicated. While she provided a stable home environment, Bundy later claimed that he felt unloved and misunderstood. His sense of isolation and inability to form meaningful relationships with his family may have contributed to his later behavior. As a teenager, Bundy was described as shy and introverted, struggling to fit in with his peers. He was often bullied for his perceived social awkwardness and lack of athletic ability. Despite his difficulties, Bundy was known for his intelligence and excelled academically. He developed an early interest in politics and often volunteered for local campaigns. During his high school years, Bundy's behavior began to show signs of the manipulative tendencies he would later be known for. He became adept at presenting different personas to different people, charming some while alienating others. This ability to manipulate and deceive became a hallmark of his later criminal behavior. Early signs of disturbance. While Bundy's early life did not outwardly suggest the violent tendencies he would later exhibit, there were subtle signs of disturbance. As a child, he enjoyed reading detective magazines and crime novels, particularly those that featured graphic depictions of violence and sexual assault. This early fascination with violent crime hinted at the darker impulses that lay beneath his seemingly normal exterior. Bundy's adolescent years were also marked by incidents of petty theft and voyeurism. He was known to peep into the windows of his female neighbors and steal items from their homes. These behaviors, though not uncommon in troubled youth, indicated a growing disregard for social norms and the rights of others. College years and identity crisis. After graduating from high school in 1965, Bundy attended the University of Puget Sound for a year before transferring to the University of Washington in Seattle. It was during his college years that Bundy's identity crisis intensified. He struggled with feelings of inadequacy and insecurity, often fabricating stories about his background to appear more impressive to his peers. Bundy's college years also marked the beginning of his more serious relationships with women. In 1967, he began dating Stephanie Brooks, a fellow UW student. Brooks was from a wealthy Californian family, and Bundy saw her as a symbol of the success and status he craved. When Brooks ended the relationship in 1968, citing Bundy's lack of direction and ambition, he was devastated. This rejection profoundly affected Bundy and may have been a catalyst for his later violent behavior. In the aftermath of his breakup with Brooks, Bundy's behavior became increasingly erratic. He dropped out of college and began drifting aimlessly, working a series of menial jobs. During this period, Bundy traveled to Colorado and then on to the East Coast, where he attempted to trace his paternity. His discovery that his sister was actually his mother and his parents were his grandparents only added to his sense of betrayal and confusion. Return to college and political ambitions. In 1969, Bundy returned to the University of Washington, where he pursued a degree in psychology. This period marked a temporary stabilization in his life. He became more involved in campus activities and even received commendations for his academic performance. Bundy's interest in psychology may have been driven by a desire to understand his own complex emotions and behaviors. During his time at UW, Bundy rekindled his relationship with Stephanie Brooks, who was impressed by his apparent transformation. Simultaneously, he began dating Elizabeth Klopfer, a single mother whom he met in a Seattle bar. Bundy's ability to maintain relationships with multiple women while presenting himself as a charming and responsible individual was indicative of his manipulative nature. Bundy's involvement in politics also increased during this time. He worked on several Republican campaigns and was well regarded by his colleagues for his enthusiasm and organizational skills. This period of apparent normalcy, however, was merely a facade. Beneath the surface, Bundy's darker impulses continued to fester. Early crimes and escalation. Ted Bundy's criminal activities began in the early 1970s, but it is believed that he might have started as early as his teenage years with incidents of petty theft and voyeurism. His first confirmed murders occurred in 1974, when Bundy was living in Seattle, Washington, and attending the University of Washington. His first known victim, Linda Ann Healy, disappeared from her basement room on January 31, 1974. She was a student at the university, and her body was later found in a remote area, indicating the start of a series of brutal killings. Bundy's modus operandi often involved preying on young women, particularly college students. He would typically approach his victims in public places, feigning an injury or posing as an authority figure to gain their trust. Once he had them alone, he would overpower them, often using blunt force to subdue them, and then transport them to secluded locations where he would commit his assaults and murders. Pattern of abduction and murder. Bundy's pattern of crime was both methodical and opportunistic. He usually targeted young, attractive women with long hair parted in the middle, often luring them into his car with the promise of help or directions. His vehicle of choice was a Volkswagen Beetle, which he modified by removing the passenger seat to facilitate his attacks and transport his victims' bodies. Bundy's killings were characterized by extreme violence. He would bludgeon his victims with a blunt instrument, often a crowbar, before taking them to a secondary location where he would sexually assault them. Many of his victims were strangled to death, and Bundy was known to engage in necrophilia with their corpses. He would return to the scenes of his crimes to further mutilate the bodies and engage in post-mortem activities, a behavior indicative of his deep-seated psychological issues. One of Bundy's most infamous attacks occurred in the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University on January 15, 1978. Bundy broke into the sorority house and brutally attacked 4 women, killing 2 of them, Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy. He then went on to assault another woman, Cheryl Thomas, in her nearby apartment. The ferocity and boldness of these attacks highlighted Bundy's escalating violence and his growing sense of invincibility. Cross-state crime spree. Bundy's crimes were not confined to a single state. His murderous spree spread across Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Utah, Colorado, and Florida. This multi-state crime wave made it difficult for law enforcement agencies to connect the dots and apprehend him. Bundy's knowledge of law enforcement tactics, gained through his studies in psychology and his work at a crime commission, allowed him to evade capture for years. In Utah, Bundy attacked and killed several women, including Nancy Wilcox, Melissa Smith, and Laura Ames. His presence in Colorado led to the disappearances and murders of Karen Campbell, Julie Cunningham, and Denise Oliverson. His ability to cross state lines and continue his killing spree demonstrated his cunning and adaptability. The downfall of Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy, one of America's most notorious serial killers, evaded capture for years, leaving a trail of terror across several states. His eventual downfall was a combination of dogged police work, chance encounters, and his own escalating recklessness. This essay delves into the sequence of events that led to Bundy's capture, trials, and eventual execution, marking the end of his reign of terror. Initial capture and escape. Ted Bundy's downfall began with his arrest on August 16, 1975 in Granger, Utah. Officer Bob Hayward noticed Bundy driving suspiciously in a Volkswagen Beetle. Upon searching the vehicle, Hayward found handcuffs, a crowbar, and a ski mask, items that raised immediate suspicion and led to Bundy's arrest. Despite this, Bundy's charm and lack of direct evidence initially worked in his favor. However, further investigation linked him to several disappearances and murders. Bundy was charged with the kidnapping of Carol Duranche, a young woman he had attempted to abduct in 1974. Duranche had managed to escape, providing a vital testimony that led to Bundy's conviction in March 1976. He was sentenced to serve 1 to 15 years in the Utah State Prison. This marked the beginning of the end for Bundy, but his story was far from over. Escapes from custody. Bundy's first escape occurred on June 7, 1977, while he was in Aspen, Colorado, to stand trial for the murder of Karen Campbell. During a court recess, Bundy jumped from a second-story window and evaded capture for 6 days. He was eventually recaptured but not deterred. His second escape on December 30, 1977, was more elaborate. Bundy sawed a hole in the ceiling of his cell at the Garfield County Jail and escaped through the crawl space. This time, he managed to evade capture for longer and embarked on a cross-country journey to Florida. Florida murders and final capture. In Florida, Bundy's violence reached new heights. On January 15, 1978, he broke into the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University, attacking 4 women and killing 2, Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy. This brutal attack, followed by the murder of 12-year-old Kimberly Leach in Lake City, Florida, highlighted Bundy's escalating violence and desperation. Bundy's final capture occurred on February 15, 1978, when he was stopped by Pensacola police officer David Lee. Lee found Bundy's car parked near a house he had attempted to burglarize. Bundy initially gave a false name, but after a brief struggle, he was arrested. His true identity was confirmed through fingerprints, linking him to the Chi Omega attacks and Leach's murder. Trial and conviction. Bundy's trial for the Chi Omega murders began in Miami on June 25, 1979. It was one of the first to be nationally televised, bringing unprecedented media attention. Bundy acted as his own defense attorney, relishing the limelight and attempting to manipulate the court. Despite his efforts, the evidence against him was overwhelming. Eyewitnesses placed him at the scene, and bite mark analysis on Lisa Levy's body matched Bundy's dental impressions. On July 24, 1979, Bundy was found guilty of the murders of Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy, as well as the attempted murders of Karen Chandler and Kathy Kleiner. He was sentenced to death. In a separate trial for the murder of Kimberly Leach, Bundy was again found guilty and received a second death sentence in February 1980. Bundy's behavior during his trials and incarceration provided valuable insights into his psychological profile. He displayed traits of narcissism, psychopathy, and a profound need for control and domination. Bundy's intelligence and charm masked his violent tendencies, allowing him to manipulate those around him. His confessions made shortly before his execution revealed the extent of his crimes. Bundy admitted to over 30 murders, but the true number remains unknown, with estimates ranging much higher. Ted Bundy's execution on January 24, 1989 at Florida State Prison marked the end of a dark chapter in American criminal history. His execution was met with mixed reactions, relief and closure for the families of his victims, and a macabre fascination for the public. Bundy's case left a lasting impact on the study of criminal behavior, forensic science, and law enforcement practices. Bundy's crimes and subsequent capture highlighted significant flaws in law enforcement communication and coordination across state lines. His ability to evade capture for so long was partly due to the lack of a centralized database for tracking serial offenders. Bundy's case prompted changes in how law enforcement agencies share information and collaborate on investigations. The use of forensic evidence such as bite mark analysis played a crucial role in Bundy's conviction, emphasizing the importance of forensic science in criminal investigations. Bundy's trials also underscored the challenges of handling high-profile cases, particularly in managing media coverage and public interest. Ted Bundy's story has been the subject of numerous books, documentaries, and films, reflecting the public's enduring fascination with his crimes. His ability to blend into society while committing horrific acts of violence challenged the stereotypical image of a serial killer, contributing to a broader understanding of psychopathy and criminal behavior. Bundy's case also sparked debates about the death penalty, mental health, and the nature of evil. His manipulative charm and intelligence forced society to confront uncomfortable truths about the capacity for violence within seemingly ordinary individuals.